but it will still be for the wrong reasons. Even if a religious person does something well and does something good, it'll be for the wrong reasons. So in that sense, you still can't really call that person good. Um, an atheist, an atheist can be bad, yes, but that is not inherently because that person is atheist. It is rather because that person doesn't have um, doesn't have any like belief in ethics beyond that. But the point is that um, any I mean a proper sense of ethics requires your religion. In fact, right, I guess one could be potentially Christian and have a proper sense of ethics, but the point is that one would then have to still derive one's sense of ethics independently from the religion. And so then you would end up being like a Christian just because you actually end up thinking that the empirical evidence suggests that Christianity is true. But even if you believed that, you'd still have to you'd have to loathe the God. So you'd have to worship the God simply because you think that Christianity is true and that this God does exist, and then you do it simply out of self-preservation to like avoid going to hell. You worship this God, but you'd still fundamentally consider this God evil. So in theory, you could be a Christian and still be a good person, but you would have to consider the Christian God evil. Um, so yeah, and likewise, like, and yeah, an atheist would just have to have a proper sense of ethics, and so the fundament, and which by that I mean believe in the number one fundamental principle of ethics, which is the utilitarian principle of minimizing suffering and maximizing well-being for all. And then, well, there are these two accessory principles of fairness and freedom, which are also quite important, but they're not quite as essential as this number one utilitarian principle. Um, so yeah, yeah, that is my position. If you're in particular, if you worship a god that sends people to hell, then you're really evil. If you believe if you worship a sort of despotic god, but that doesn't do something quite as bad, then you're still evil, and even but not as much, of course. And even then, if you believe in some sort of religion that has a bunch of gods but doesn't necessarily worship them that much, then you're still probably going to be evil, just sort of more indirectly because you're irrational, and because you believe in something that for which there's no good evidence, and so that means that you're presumably also going to be irrational. You're going to be irrational regarding ethics. So you see, if hell exists and it's not infinite, well, I'll agree with you simply because I consider that infinity cannot exist. I think there's actually, I think that is a mistake for some reason. Lots of physicists even still seem to believe that infinity can exist, and I think that is a complete mistake because, well, just think about statistically, anything finite compared to something infinite is going to be infinitely small, and that means that, like, also, for instance, well, temporally, a unit of time with respect to infinity, it would be infinity small. Okay, no, I I don't really agree with that, but but what I'm saying is more the statistical argument against infinity is that any unit of time that is finite is going to be infinitely small, which means that you're going to be infinitely unlikely to exist within that unit of time. So in fact, like there'd be zero probability of us existing right now if there's still going to be an infinity of existence afterwards, right? So that's kind of a good example, I think, sort of a good explanation for why infinity is impossible. Um, it doesn't matter if it's soul-based; it's still like subjected to laws of mathematics. Everything, any of existence would still be subjected to basic laws of mathematics. So yeah. Um, and we can't know that you'd get used to the pain and grow into it. I mean, that is just like speculation. Whereas this is not speculation because it's based on actual math. Um, so yeah. Um, then let's see. And I also said like conservatives are evil, and so that also takes into account that most of them are religious, and then even regardless of being religious, then you're gonna be typically their ideology is based kind of on the kind of evil that God has. So it's fundamentally, again, I think that is a mistake, that superficially they might seem nice, but fundamentally their fundamental values are evil, and in that sense, even if they do good things, it'll be for the wrong reason. Yeah, and that's why I put conservatives in little quotation marks. What I mean is your sort of typical sort of conservative idea. Obviously, if you're like a conservationist who's like conserving like nature or something, then that's not evil, okay? Um, what I mean is that the conservative is mostly about conserving a society which is fundamentally inequitable, is fundamentally unfair, and fundamentally causes many people to suffer so that others may benefit from that suffering. They might benefit from that unfairness. It's literally about putting people down to bring yourself up. That is fundamentally what the conservative ideology is about, even though most conservatives don't really recognize it, and even most non-conservatives don't recognize it. So my opinion on Maoism, I mean, just all socialism in general is simply an inefficient economic system. I think, it's relatively, theoretically, it's relatively well-meaning, so it's not at all as fundamentally evil as things like religion, well, especially like Christianity or Islam or conservatism. And specifically Maoism, I'm sorry to say, I probably don't know, I don't know enough about like the theoretical, characteristics that distinguish Maoism from other forms of socialism to be able to really specifically discuss Maoism. If you want, if you can like provide me with specific aspects of Maoism that you'd like me to voice my opinion on, then of course I can do that. Um, but I don't see why Maoism should be singled out in particular, because yeah, I'm not. In any case, Maoism. I mean, Mao was more like he was a politician, largely, even much more than like a theoretician. And in that sense, I don't really necessarily think that even is uh, a specific like Maoist philosophy. Is more like a system of politics. In the same way that like I don't know how to say that. It's a sort of practical set of policies, but it might not be. But again, I don't really know enough about it to be able to really properly discuss it. That's just my impression. And well, I mean, what we've seen in any case is that socialism is not particularly. Hmm. Oh, you did it twice. Uh-oh. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So thanks for mentioning that. It's true that I haven't even really looked into that aspect, but yeah, I don't. Basically, it doesn't matter because it focuses. I guess what I like to look at is just in practice how do these things work, and so it's more for instance imperialist. I guess the point is that you say Trotsky is by choice. No, Trotsky is also like I don't know, like Trotsky was also violent. He supported like violent oppression as well, and he supported massacring like other lineages of like socialists and stuff. So Trotskyism is not good. That's like a mistake of these Trotskyists to think that like Trotskyism is actually somehow good. Um, it's not actually good. Um, like no socialism is good because socialism is is fundamentally inefficient. So what basically happens is that in all instances, um, what happens is that you got an economic system which is suboptimal, it's inefficient, and it's going to keep people poorer than they have to be. Um, Okay, yeah, okay, so sure. Um, I'll turn this back on actually because it's kind of useful to have it. Um, yeah, the rashes. Um, Again, I think it's mistaken. It's one of these just it looks like socialism just superficially it seems good. Anarchism also superficially seems good. So I mean, the thing is that you actually need a kind of state just to keep things functioning. Like a state is very useful for all sorts of things. Like firstly, well, a thing like a police force is actually very useful to just keep like law and order, which itself is a good thing. A state is very useful to be able to like have a proper like democracy and things. Just a sort of system that actually a structure that allows you to do that kind of thing. The government has lots of agencies that are also very useful to ensure that society sort of functions smoothly. Having a state is very useful for things like you know you know creation of like infrastructure and things that maybe wouldn't be necessarily profitable. Um, I mean, basically, anarchism is just not. They're clearly capitalists. They're clearly not socialists. They're state capitalists, like China is. I think Nazi. I would consider Nazi society to be quite similar to modern day China. Um, that was what I would say. Socialism is a misnomer. It was literally intended to mislead. No, they're definitely not socialist. Socialist would imply actually like a socialist economy, having just a state-run economy. Um, the Nazi Party had, yeah, it does have private industries. It was not socialist. It just called itself socialist to gain the sympathy of socialists. Yeah, overall it's not an economic system, but the economic system is state capitalism, where there is a certain amount of state control over private industries. The state is kind of allowed to interfere with them and sort of has the ultimate authority, but it's still private industry. And you still have like completely free markets and like there isn't guaranteed employment or anything like that like you have in a socialist economy. Um, and that, of course, is the problem with the socialist economy is you have guaranteed employment. So even if a person does a poor job, that person keeps the job, and it keeps its income. And then there's the issue of the planned economy, and like price fixing and stuff, which means that it's inefficient at responding to demand. And so basically, it's a shitty economic system. Um, but the problem typically with capitalism is that you'll end up with high inequity and that is very much a problem. And so the way to fix that is to simply directly attack it at the actual place that it's happening, and which is why what I advocate for is just to introduce a basic income and a maximum income, so as to rein in these extremes of these extremes in poverty and extremes in wealth, which are both fundamentally unfair. And that way you still get to have a properly functioning economic system, and the free market, but you don't have the unfairness that typically comes with it. Um, yeah, okay, thanks. But what do you agree also with my saying that Muslims and conservatives are? Um, because literally, do you agree with that? So, but there is a reason for this, like I've explained with Elaine here, is that is that it's fundamentally due. It's about their God fundamentally, which is evil because literally this God is construed as being omnipotent and omniscient. So it knows that people, it has created people who will do wrong things, and this God certainly knows that these people will do wrong things, and this God could have created people to not do bad things, and so that they wouldn't then be, liable to being like punished afterwards. And even beyond that, I mean, they wouldn't have done the bad things, which is the cause of suffering. So, I mean, the point is that if your God is all powerful, then the God is ultimately responsible for everything that happens and for everything that people end up doing. So that is obviously the God is actually responsible for all the evil that happens, and thus is actually evil itself. And then, well, when you introduce the concept of hell, suddenly the evil just balloons. Um, well, I'm not sure I want to get into that, but the point is that the, there's this concept of hell, which is this concept of infinite like torture, which is absolutely horrible. Because I mean, you think about it. In any case, I mean, in any case, firstly, infinity I don't think is possible because any finite thing is going to be infinitely small compared to infinity, which means that like statistically it can't even exist, which means that I think actually infinity just cannot exist. So, but just supposing that, you know, that we're talking about infinity or just something extremely long, then still anything that you do in your lifetime is just going to be completely derisory compared to the torture you experience afterwards. So it's a completely disproportionate punishment, and it completely violates the fundamental principle of the utilitarian principle, which to me is the fundamental ethical principle of of minimizing suffering and maximizing well-being. I don't know what MCYT is. So regarding Stalin, yes, like it's true, especially in his younger days, he was quite dashing. Do you believe in destiny? If you tell me what MCYT, I can respond to that. Do I believe in destiny? Well, in the sense of, yeah, I believe in determinism. So yes, I believe in that. I think it would be absurd that determinism not actually be a thing. I think that, you know, there must be a mechanism for things to happen. I think this idea of like quantum indeterminism is, well, I've seen a few episodes, but I don't think I've seen like the episode regarding that. Kind of depends on how you see it, but yeah, fundamentally, like when you do something, you're always going to do that. Like so, I mean, obviously you can like choose and you feel like you're choosing things, but fundamentally you don't really have a choice because whatever you end up doing, that was predetermined. It was always going to happen. Even billions of years ago, it was already going to happen, and whatever you know, even very small thing you end up doing, it was already planned to happen billions of years ago. So yeah, we don't have control. We don't have like quote free will. We don't have those things. Um, which is not like fatalism. It doesn't mean that like, you know, if I choose, fatalism is like if I decide to do something differently, the same outcome will happen. I'm not saying that at all. That is fatalism, and that is nonsensical. No, determinism is simply that all that happens was always going to happen like that. It's like a movie. Everything that happens, really, the universe is just like a movie, and you're just watching it unfold. Um, okay, sure. Um, Send me a tape. And so, no, fatalism is not real. Your God is infinite randomness. But that's literally not okay. I mean, you can say that, but literally there isn't such a thing as infinite randomness. I mean, literally, I really don't believe in this concept of quantum indeterminacy because, I mean, there's got to be like a mechanism that decides like which way the like yeah you know the your particle goes and stuff. There's got to be some sort of I firmly believe there's got to be some sort of mechanism. What are all born creatures destined to experience? That sounds like sort of just a sort of meaningless sort of question you'll like ask in like a fortune cookie or something. I'm sorry. Um, like, what does that mean? Like, it's just whatever happens is that is what is destined to happen. Um, I'm not sure how I can respond to that. However, I can just answer to the other people who've arrived more recently that um, uh, you know, regarding religion. Like, even if you don't believe in this hell, because I think that is what really makes these religions the most evil, is the concept of hell. But even not that this God is very authoritarian, very despotic, very narcissistic, and very fickle, very mercurial, temperamental, all just really a shitty ruler. And so like even just the Jewish God as such is still a pretty bad God, even though at least he doesn't send people to hell. So I mean, you're still like bad if you believe in Judaism also, and then even any other religion, um, like even if your gods are all like really nice or something. Um, well, we've already kind of discussed that, but God is okay, well, if you actually like believe in a god that is supposedly absent ruler, if you believe like in if you believe in a sort of deistic kind of god, then you can. But the point is that the God of the Bible is not a deistic God. He's very involved in people's affairs, and so I think that is not certainly the God of Yahwehism. It's not the the so-called Abrahamic God, and so even if your religion, yeah, like there's like the Nietzschean idea of like God is dead and stuff, and I I kind of believe in that. I mean, I kind of like that idea, um, but it's about saying that fundamentally we don't need a sort of external source of authority to determine our sense of morality and purpose. And so, in that sense, I mean, I think we should want to eliminate that idea and that way of thinking. Um, and so like I said, like religion itself is actually wrong in all instances because it's about believing in things for which there's no good evidence. Um, so that in that sense, it will make you think irrationally. It will make you believe in irrational things, and as a result, you will actually end up being you know also not able to rationally determine what is good and what is bad. And so sometimes a thing that is bad, well, you'll think it is good, and then you'll do it, and then you'll unwittingly be a bad person because of your irrationality. And that is why all religion fundamentally is evil. And so then what I hadn't really talked about yet is why conservatives are bad. So of course, largely conservatives. So of course, I said conservative in quotation marks because, like you said, Elaine, yeah, it depends what you're conserving. If you're conserving like some good thing, then of course that is not a bad thing. But what I mean is that most conservatives are they want to conserve a society which is fundamentally unfair, and so even beyond the fact that most of these conservatives also believe in religion, they also want to perpetuate unfairness, and they want to perpetuate suffering for people so that one can, it's basically about making oneself above the other people, about creating a large differential between oneself and other people, and about precisely like kind of being like the god of Yahwehist religion, of being way above other people and putting other people down. And that is mostly what conservatism is about, fundamentally, even though they don't really recognize it. And it's both within a particular society and between societies. So that within a society, it's about having rulers. It has about having kings or like oligarchs or whatever, and the lowly masses. And meanwhile, it's also about having one's own tribal society benefit at the expense of other tribal societies. So that is why that is bad. Let's see. Is there... I haven't seen any messages here, so maybe everyone is gone at this point. Sometimes I don't... Unfortunately, yeah, the viewer count has suddenly dropped precipitously. Maybe Raskolnikov is here since you're not part of... Oh no. Here. Okay, this religion stuff is just weird. What do you mean by that? Do you mean like my discussion? Do you mean my discussion about it, or do you mean like religion? Well, like I said, because the fundamental ethical principle is the maximization of well-being, the minimization of suffering. That's the utilitarian principle. And no, the point is that we do know. We do know. I just that is what evil is. Evil is when you don't respect. Is when you violate that fundamental ethical principle. It doesn't matter. It's not evil from a human perspective. It's evil from an absolute perspective. That is literally the definition. If you don't have that as a definition of evil, then you're irrational again. That like rationally, that is the definition of evil. It's suffering. That is the only valid definition of evil. It's the intentional inflicting of suffering, the intentional in actions that intentionally don't maximize well-being, that don't minimize suffering. That is evil, and the God clearly fits that criterion of evil. And in fact, it fits that criterion of evil, and so God is fundamentally the most evil thing imaginable, even. I mean, it's certainly more infinitely more evil than any possible human. So yeah, no, I think we can absolutely say. I mean, in any case, we're never going to know like from like beyond a human perspective, and the point is that no, it's not. No, that again, that is a sort of religious type thinking that makes you think that you need to sort of transcend something and that God works in ways you can't understand. No, no, it's not the worst timeline in as much as there are still some people that go to heaven. So the worst would be that everyone goes to hell. So I mean, according to that religion. So I mean, it's true that there could be even worse, but like, and there could be even just more people overall that would be going to hell. So that would be worse. But no, you don't need to be like anywhere else to understand things. You don't need to like be some kind of supernatural being to understand things. No, there's no need for that. That is again mistaken thinking. That's part of the irrational thinking. That is the whole problem of religion. Um, and so then so from empirical evidence, I actually do end up believing in a thing that would. No, I think so. I don't know if you maybe like have seen me talk about this or something, but yeah, I've said that we should actually genetically modify humans at the level of the embryo to eradicate evil. Once we know what are the biological determinants of evil, we should eradicate those to make people less evil, to make people more benevolent towards each other and towards everyone. So like I think that is a good thing. I fully support like genetic modification of humans, what's so-called transhumanism. It's also actually eugenics, but it's not the sort of, breeding. No, humans aren't. Well, yes and no. Some humans are probably inherently evil. Some humans are a lot less inherently evil. Some humans are able to recognize at least what evil is, so that they're able to then not do evil. Um, but the point is that there are biological factors that make humans evil, and I think that those biological factors can, at least to some extent, be eliminated, and so that we can eliminate the tendency towards evil to a large extent through genetic engineering. And that is actually what I support. Of course, for now we can't do it, but I mean, certainly I believe that the technology for doing so is possible to develop, and I would absolutely support doing that as soon as it's possible to do so. Yeah. Um, and so I've said this again. I actually believe that empirical evidence, does support the existence of some supernatural phenomena, because there's so many people that report having these experiences that would essentially violate the laws of physics as we know them. And so I actually do more or less believe in supernatural phenomena just based on my epistemological way of thinking that relies on empiricism. So what I mean by that is that the way I acquire knowledge implies an acknowledgement of empirical evidence above all else. And so if the empirical evidence indicates, if like a huge amount of anecdotal evidence indicates that these supernatural, and even like some scientific studies, lots of scientific studies indicate that supernatural phenomena do exist, well, I'm forced to recognize that they most likely do exist, even if so far scientific theories don't have a way to account for those. So I absolutely believe. I mean, I don't absolutely, but I certainly recognize that the evidence weighs in favor of the existence of these phenomena. And now I finally come up recently across a site that provided an actual plausible explanation for the occurrence of these phenomena. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that, but the point is that religious people. No, that again, that is mistaken thinking. We know that what is evil is suffering. Like literally, the problem is suffering. Um, that is the fundamental problem, and evil is the causing of suffering. I think Buddhism, like Buddhism as religion, is mistaken in many ways because it's religion, but the fundamental principles of Buddhism are very good. I think, yeah, but the point is that like, yeah, I get your idea. Anyway, Siddhartha, whatever, he was, the Buddha quote, he seems like a pretty smart guy. Yeah, I suffer. I suffer, and that is why stealing is bad. And Siddhartha said that very well. He said that, I mean, the fundamental principle of Buddhism is to say that there is suffering, and that suffering is the problem of existence, and that solving that problem is the most fundamental goal that anyone should have. And Buddhism is completely right about that. So like the fundamental, concept, the fundamental ethical concept of Buddhism is correct. Irrespectively of the fact that it also has a cosmology which is not like supported by solid evidence. So what are you saying? But so yeah, so like fundamentally, yeah, but everyone does suffer, and it's not all that different. The point is that everyone, there are things that can reliably make us suffer. Yeah, but by and large is pretty similar. Like most people are going to be unhappy if you steal something from them. Most people are going to be happy if you give her presents. Yeah, and some murderer might be happy to just be like fed and stuff in prison. Okay, but the point is that by and large, most people probably aren't going to be happy. But it might make some murderers happy. Okay, but the point is that by and large we're pretty similar to one another, and so by and large we respond to the same stimulus in the same way. If I stab you, you're going to be in pain and you're going to suffer from it. That there are not many people that are going to actually experience more pleasure than by being stabbed than by not being stabbed. So yeah, I think more or less we can predict what kind of response a person is going to have to a particular action. I'm not sure the relevance. I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you about that, but I'm not sure how that fits in with what we've been discussing. But yeah, we do definitely have this tendency to be egocentric, and to see ourselves as the protagonist of everything, kind of, in a way. It's like the world revolves around us. I think that's kind of natural, and I I don't actually think it's really much a problem. I mean, it's mistaken, but I don't think it's really a problem per se, as long as you don't end up doing things that end up hurting other people as a result of that. Again, to me, the fundamental principle is maximization of well-being, and just because you sort of see yourself as the center of the world doesn't actually mean that you might not properly respect that principle, because as long as you fundamentally recognize the importance of everyone's importance and everyone's well-being. Yes and no. Yes and no. I think well, because the point is that you could theoretically be able to see things from a just completely like absolute abstract perspective. You could be able to see things just like from a perspective of treating all individuals equally, but then you'd still want to preserve all individuals, so you'd also preserve yourself. And obviously, since you are yourself, you're just obviously going to be more able to decide what happens to you. So obviously you're still going to be able to preserve yourself. But the point is that you might, if it comes to choosing between you and somebody else, you might choose somebody else instead at that point. But I think, especially as long as you just recognize that, at least, even just sort of theoretically, intellectually, that all people should be treated fairly, and that all people deserve to, to have, to get treated so that they experience the maximum well-being and the least suffering, then I think that's enough. I think that's enough, because then you'll vote, because usually in most instances, the well-being of people is determined not so much by any particular individual actions, but more by systemic issues. And so as long as you sort of theoretically recognize that people need to be treated fairly, you're going to vote for things, you're going to support things at a macro level that are going to make society much better for people overall. And as a result, you'll see that people are going to be much better off as a result of your supporting these large-scale policies. Again, I think most suffering is caused by problematic large-scale policies and not just about people being mean to each other individually. So really, the most important thing that anyone can do is really support proper large-scale policies and actually not care so much about whether somebody that you interacted with was mean to you or something like that. Like that kind of stuff is meaningless. Yeah, I yeah, but well, I've of course, of course, but that is what I've been doing. I've been using philosophy to explain the problem of religion, and in particular the Yahwehist religion. Um, but I don't think the hearts of humans is really, philosophy is a lot more than quote the quote hearts of humans. Um, Philosophy is, like I said, it's like the utilitarian principle. That is an aspect of philosophy, is determining what are the fundamental ethical principles. Um, that is philosophy. Um, I don't think like knowing the again this sort of knowing the hearts of humans things. It sounds to me like this. It's sort of about kind of making it sound a bit lyrical, but ultimately kind of a bit more wishy-washy. It's actually less philosophical and more just sort of sentimentalism, and it's both. There's some amount of innate tendency towards good and evil, and there's learned tendencies towards good and evil. Um, I think it's both. It's a mix. Um, I think coming to understand the fundamental ethical principle, the utilitarian principle, is learned. You can learn it from an external source. You can read about it, or you can just independently develop it yourself. You're maybe it's important to bear in mind that lots of things that the Bible will consider sins aren't even necessarily sins. Um, Again, the sin to me, sin is simply again the disrespect of the utilitarian principle. So sure, we might be prone. Yeah, yeah. So sure, but also because stealing doesn't typically cause as much suffering as killing. So in that sense we're still actually kind of adhering to the utilitarian principle. We know that killing is worse because it causes more suffering. So it's kind of proportional to the amount of suffering that we might inflict. So yeah, yeah. I don't know if we're more prone to sins of equal suffering inflicting. Probably we are, but usually, usually it's you sort of weigh the different things. Like you ask yourself, um, what benefit will I get from it, and how will that impact other people, and then you end up making a decision as a result of that. Um, so yeah. Um, I think there are lots of innate tendencies both for being evil to benefit oneself, but there's also a strong tendency to help other people. I guess you mean like the victim. When you sort of just don't consider about the victim. Yeah, because you're not seeing directly the consequence so much. I guess that's what you mean. Yeah, I think that's actually apparently they said that in wars most people never even shoot they never even use their weapon, and especially like in close combat they never use it. But then in far away combat they use it a lot more because they don't get to directly experience what happens to the other people. So yeah, yeah, I agree with that. You're right. Um, and so, well, anyway, I don't know if you want to discuss other things. Like basically, my fundamental philosophy, like I said, is maximization of well-being, which is why, well, materially, I want an economy that is productive so that it generates more wealth and so more material well-being to everyone. But I also believe, of course, in fairness. So I think that that material wealth should be more or less, it should be fairly distributed. And then I also believe in freedom, which means I believe in sort of letting people do whatever they want as long as it doesn't hurt other people. Um, and so what I end up advocating for is a basic income and a maximum income, like I've said. Those are my fundamental principles, and importantly, this would be at a global level. This would be for everyone, and the same level for everyone. So everyone have the same basic income, the same maximum income, and that's just fair, right? That's kind of the issue with nationalism, is that it's fundamentally unfair, because it literally means that nationalism literally means that you're gonna have a different level of, you know, economic well-being just depending on where you happen to be born. It completely violates the principle of equity, of like treating all people equally, or like equitably, fairly. Um, so you need to do this globally. And of course, it requires also global government. And again, people, for some reason, they have this huge sort of fear of this. They have this huge like knee-jerk reaction against this, which I don't understand why. I think it's literally just fundamentally it's a reactionary, very evil subhuman force that is literally the reason people don't like this is because it's literally a great idea. In the same way that they dislike George Soros literally because he's a good person. Um, yeah, nationalism is the most worst problem. It's like literally the reason I think why like all, I guess, you know, the Fermi paradox is the reason that what the Fermi paradox is a name to explain, you know, to designate the fact that we're not seeing any other forms of intelligent life in the universe. My theory is that, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the reason, my belief is that the reason that we don't see other forms of intelligent life is because they all self-destruct. And the reason they self-destruct is because of nationalism, is that they end up destroying each other out of nationalism. So literally, the reason that all, you know, civilization eventually just collapses, and you know, which is a terrible thing. The reason for that is nationalism. So really, you know, lots of, you know, these sort of lefty people think that like, you know, global warming now is the biggest problem, the biggest threat to our species. No, it isn't. The biggest problem is nationalism, not global warming. Yeah, yeah. Um, the biggest problem is just like selfishness, and be willing to hurt people for your benefit. And I think the way that it's most problematic is actually at the large scale, again, because large scale things just are going to be bigger, and they're going to, you know, create more damage. So really nationalism is the worst thing. It's the worst thing of all things. And um, the reason people hate this idea of a global society and global government is literally because they believe in tribal inequitarianism. But no, because if you've at that point you've still got an enemy. See, at that point you still you're, you know, what do you say, like kicking the can down the road. You still have another person, which is your enemy, and that will actually just create even more of a problem, because then you're going to have interstellar wars, and that is going to it's still nationalism. It's just nationalism now, which where nation now covers an entire planet or entire like solar system or something. It's still not it's still not a good thing. What you need is a fully universal society that covers all the entire universe, all planets. Okay, you can't have any kind of, you know, planetary based nationalism. That is even worse. It's always the bigger it is, the worse it is. Um, so what you need is to stop having this animosity between people of any kind. Um, and and so like yeah, and so the reason these people hate this idea of a global society is precisely because it's actually good, because it's fair, it will maximize well-being for everyone, it will maximize freedom for everyone. And nationalists hate that. What nationalists wants is oppression and unfairness, and to just most people to suffer, so that a few oligarchs, which might not even be themselves bizarrely, but just so that a few, they still just love unfairness so much that they're willing to be themselves the people who are at the bottom, just because they love this idea of having like a king on top. And that is what nationalists really want. They want a king on top of their country, and then they want their country to be on top of other countries. Um, and they just completely hate the idea of fairness. And so that's why I'm saying that again. These conservatives, quote, because conservatives really are that. They're like feudalist nationalists. They really just want a society like what we had in Europe in the Middle Ages. Um, these people, they are really fundamentally evil. The things that they believe in are evil, and if you let them have their way, you'll end up having something really horrible. So that really needs to be fought very seriously. And I think people really don't realize at all how problematic this really is. Um, and so that is something I want to make people see and understand. Um, and so that kind of explains the title of my whole post here. I'm not sure if there's like other stuff. Oh yeah, you mentioned hydroponics. Yeah, hydroponics can be in like there is uh, it definitely is an efficient allocation of like water and nutrients to a plant. So I think definitely there seems to be um, lots of scope for expanding that and so as to like waste less resources. Definitely, I agree with you with that. Although, I mean, the problem with hydroponics is at the same time there's lots of, it's quite costly just to set it up, and as such, I think that you have to make like a cost benefit analysis and just to see if it can work or not, like at large scale. I'm presumably, the fact that still most agriculture now does not use hydroponics is based on the fact that so far it would actually be less efficient to do it. But I think just as technology progresses, we're going to see more and more of that. Yeah.